Tonight on Primetime Politics.
We won't relent until the last hostage returns home. We remember you.
Marking 1 year since the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. Richard Robertson of Brith talks about the impact in Canada and the ongoing fight against anti-Semitism. Alberta threatens more court action over the Federal Impact Assessment Act. We hear why from the province's Energy Minister, Brian Jean. And the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner is sounding the alarm. Her office has too many complaints about alleged wrongdoing in the federal government and not enough resources. Harriet Solloway tells us what that means. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Andrew Thompson, in for Michael Serapio. It is October 7th, 1 year to the day Hamas attacked Israel, killing 1,200 people and taking 250 hostages. Those attacks also triggering a war that has killed tens of thousands in Gaza, according to officials. It's a day being somberly observed in Israel, where the Prime Minister was at an October 7th ceremony in Jerusalem. Remembrance is also happening across Canada, and that includes Parliament Hill. Have a listen to the Foreign Affairs Minister.
We remember those who were murdered, all those who were injured, victims of sexual and gender-based violence, as well as those who were taken hostage. Among the innocent people killed on by Hamas, Canada mourns victims of our own. Jewidh Weinstein, Vivian Silver, Ben Mizrachi, Netta Epstein, Shir Georgi, Alexandre Luc, Adi Vital Kaplun, and Tiferet Lapido.
There were commemorations of October 7th victims inside the House chamber as well. But we also saw debate over the government's response to protests in Canada.
Here at home, though, our Jewish friends and neighbors have been doubly victimized as anti-Semitic mobs take to the streets shouting, "From Palestine to Lebanon, Israel will soon be gone. There's only one solution: intifada, revolution." Will the government clearly and unequivocally condemn these genocidal chants from hateful mobs on our streets?
Yeah. What we stand up against absolutely is the amount of hatred that we've seen in this country and countries around the world, where people will target Jewish Canadian schools, daycares, and synagogues for the acts that they have a problem with on another side of the world. We are better than that in this country. We need to stand up against that kind of hatred in support of Jewish people and in place of all people who defend their ability to worship how and whom they choose.
To talk more about October 7th, 1 year later, I'm now joined by Richard Robertson, Director of Research and Advocacy at Brith, Canada. Richard, thanks for joining me. We've seen commemorations and ceremonies in Israel and beyond today, including here in Canada. Let's start with this. What does this day mean for Jewish Canadians?
Today is a solemn day for the Jewish community in Canada. It's a day to mourn and to grieve those who we lost on October 7th, as well as to reflect on the hostages who are still being held in Gaza. And it's also an opportunity to call for their release, specifically for Canadian Jews, though, Andrew. It's a day to confront the rising anti-Semitism, which has been plaguing our community since the Hamas attacks.
All right, let's talk about that, because B'nai Brith, your organization, is devoted to the fight against anti-Semitism. How has October 7th, specifically, and the 12 months since, changed that fight?
Well, we've seen a sustained and a very troubling increase in anti-Semitism since October 7th. Anti-Semitism is nothing new. It was on the rise before October 7th, but it's taken off exponentially since October 7th. And it's really disheartening for the Jewish diaspora here in Canada to know that when there's unrest in the Middle East, it results in such a caustic impact here at home.
Now, we did hear from the Prime Minister on this today, and Justin Trudeau's statement included this: "We've seen synagogues and schools attacked, people taunted for wearing a Star of David or a kippah, blatant anti-Semitic slurs becoming common, demonstrators glorifying terrorists, and the denial of the horrific events of October 7th. This is all reprehensible and it must stop. So the question to you is, what do you think it will take to make it stop?
Well, we need legislative change. We need stronger provisions within our criminal code to hold those who are engaging in anti-Semitism accountable for their actions. We also need more from our leaders. The Prime Minister's comments are welcome, but they are not enough. We need our leadership to underscore the message that such anti-Semitism will not be tolerated, and more than mere platitudes are required. We need engagement.
Okay, now, B'nai Brith, you've joined two other groups calling on the federal government to criminalize the glorification of terrorism. So what specifically are you looking to see in the criminal code going forward?
Well, that specific call to action was for the Minister of Justice to criminalize the display of flags of listed terror entities. And we think that this is a logical advancement of Canada's criminal code legislation that's meant to combat terrorism. There seems to be a disconnect between the criminal code in its measures to fight terrorism and what is occurring on our streets. It's illogical that a group can be a listed terror entity, yet somebody can openly display their flag. This is something that shouldn't be permitted, and outlawing it would be both in line with the criminal code and its current terror provisions, but also with the legislation which lists various entities as terror groups.
Right, because there have been arrests in recent days, two charged in Toronto for allegedly waving Hezbollah flags. The charges were public incitement of hatred. So what would change with what you're looking for now?
Well, the conviction for public incitement of hatred in this instance is more complex, and this would provide the police with a more clear-cut approach to holding those who are supporting listed terror groups by displaying their flags accountable for their actions. It would also streamline the prosecution of these offenses when they were to occur.
Okay, I want to turn back to your group's last audit of anti-Semitic incidents, which called 2023 a record year. The reported cases of violence, vandalism, and harassment more than doubling to nearly 6,000. And in that report, you said Canada's Jewish community was under a threat to its survival, perhaps not seen since the Holocaust. Now, that was in May. Has anything changed 5 months later?
If anything, the situation has only intensified. Recently in Canada, we've seen terror plots emanating from this country that allegedly specifically targeted the Jewish community. The Jewish community continues to be under attack, whether it's online or in incidents that are occurring in person. If left unabated, it's anticipated that our numbers for 2024 will be worse than our numbers for 2023. And it's really just an affront to this entire nation that in 2024, a vulnerable and a marginalized group like the Jewish community with such a proud history of contributing to this country is facing such a grievous onslaught of hate.
So what more would you like to see from governments beyond the criminal code? In recent weeks, we have heard from the federal government revamping and expanding its community security funding for religious buildings, for daycares, for cemeteries. Is enough of that hard security support coming to protect people?
Those types of measures are great, but they're addressing a problem. They're not preventing it from occurring. The government has a definition of anti-Semitism, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which was adopted in 2019. We haven't seen sufficient implementation. The Prime Minister's remarks today were fantastic. However, if the Prime Minister and his government aren't going to work to implement the definition of anti-Semitism to ensure that Canadians understand what constitutes contemporary anti-Semitism, and to ensure that contemporary anti-Semitism in all of its forms will not be tolerated in our society, then we can't expect to see a reduction in the levels of anti-Semitism that we're presently facing.
Okay, let's close then with that definition of anti-Semitism, because B'nai Brith Canada made its pre-budget pitch to the government a couple of months ago, and you are asking for funding to educate students and young Canadians especially on that definition. So how would that help with what we've been talking about here today?
Well, the government's already adopted the definition. It's invested in a handbook, which is being produced by the Special Envoy's office. But if these utilities, the handbook and the definition itself, aren't known to Canadians, then we can't expect Canadians to be using them and to be familiar with what constitutes anti-Semitism. The IRA definition is a tool. It's a working definition, and it contains examples of what constitutes contemporary anti-Semitism, and we need to ensure that Canadians across the country are aware of the contents of the definition.
All right, Richard Robertson is with B'nai Brith Canada. I want to thank you so much for taking time for us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Time now for a look at what else happened in politics today. MPs held a moment of silence in the House for victims of the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. There was also unanimous consent for this motion from Conservative Deputy Leader Melissa Lantsman.
That this House unequivocally reaffirms Israel's right to defend itself from the terrorists who attack it, expresses support for the victims of October 7th and their families and the people of Israel, that calls for the immediate release of the 101 hostages still being held captive, condemns the grotesque rise in anti-Semitism and hate towards Jews in Canada over the past year, and condemns Hamas and Hezbollah as terrorist entities, which must be eliminated.
There were also tense moments today in the House on the anniversary of the attacks, with the Conservative leader calling on the Foreign Affairs Minister to condemn alleged anti-Semitic chants at recent protests.
Twice she refused to condemn those remarks. She continues to pander to Hamas supporters in the Liberal Party as part of her leadership campaign rather than doing her job.
Here's how the minister was responding to that charge outside the chamber.
We don't frickin' gaslight people. Not on a day that is so important for the country. And clearly that's what Pierre Poilievre was doing today. And clearly what he was saying, he was trying to play petty politics on the backs of victims. And so that's why not only should he apologize for what he did, but clearly the guy's unfit to become Prime Minister.
And government business in the House remained at a standstill today because of an ongoing privilege debate. It's over the request for documents relating to Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Speaker Greg Fergus allowed the question of privilege after saying the government had not fully complied with a House order for those documents. Liberals and Conservatives are blaming each other for the impasse. The Alberta government is threatening another legal challenge over the Federal Impact Assessment Act. Premier Danielle Smith says it will happen if the Trudeau government doesn't agree to more changes by the end of October. Last year, the Supreme Court of Canada deemed parts of the act unconstitutional, but Alberta says amendments passed in June do not go far enough when it comes to major resource projects. And with me now is Alberta Energy and Minerals Minister Brian Jean. Minister, good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with what exactly does your government want to see happen over the next 4 weeks?
Well, what we'd like to see is respect for the Federal Supreme Court of Canada and respect for the ruling that they made. So what we ask the federal government to do is to follow that ruling and to recognize that the Alberta government and other provincial jurisdictions have the right to our resources and to respect that ruling. And truly that's where they've fallen short is just, you know, they've had two spankings from the federal government, from the Supreme Court of Canada now, and they've just tried to go back to the drawing board and do a reach around. And by Guilbeault's own admission, he's you know, flogging a horse that is just not going to move. This is a situation where we're going to continue to go back to the Supreme Court of Canada, where the federal government is again disrespecting what the Supreme Court of Canada has said. You know, they're wasting taxpayers' money on an ideological political pursuit that they know is ultimately going nowhere. They're, in my opinion, on a federal government that's on life support.
The federal government did, though, make some changes to the act earlier this year. There were amendments. So from your government's perspective, where are those amendments falling short?
Well, they fall short in recognizing our ability to deal with our own natural resources under Section 93 of the Constitution. And in particular, the Supreme Court of Canada laid out many places where they should leave it in our jurisdiction. In particular, we saw recently a relationship build with the government of Ontario in relation to a major highway going through Ontario, and whether or not that should be under federal scrutiny. And frankly, Guilbeault himself admitted that if he went to court, he would lose on that particular case, and so he made amends to the government of Ontario simply to appease them, recognizing that if it was challenged, he would lose. To go through the Supreme Court of Canada's decision, you can see a number of places where the government of Canada is just obviously trying to do a reach around and ignoring what the Supreme Court of Canada has said related to jurisdiction, in particular natural resources jurisdiction and our industry.
Okay, the federal government, though, says there was ample consultation. Your government, the province of Alberta, says there was a lack of meaningful consultation on these changes. So for those of us on the outside, where's the disconnect here?
Well, the disconnect is on the federal government recognizing and just following what the Supreme Court of Canada said. We're not asking, we don't want to go back to court, but the truth is that if they don't follow what the federal government or the Supreme Court of Canada has said, we have to. We have no choice. We think they're doing, frankly, trying to change the law in the minimum amount of ways to reflect what their ultimate purpose is, which is to have control over our industries and to try to control the industries through whatever means they can, even though they know they can't. And, our Constitution, our country was set up recognizing the vast boundaries between our different provinces and territories. I mean, we're the second largest country in the world, and we have populations right across every part of this great country. So we have different cultures, different people, and we have to recognize that the people that set up our Constitution did so in a way to make us stronger by working together than trying to, have one dominant power in Ottawa that's so far away from reality of the people, for instance, in the West or the East or the North. We need to have respect by the federal government on the jurisdictional rights of each province. And part of that right is the right to deal with our resources and not, for instance, have a cap on our oil and gas produced. We believe we can reduce emissions, and we are reducing emissions, and we have reduced emissions. We believe we can reduce water consumption. We have reduced water consumption dramatically over the last 40 years, particularly in the oil sands, where a huge portion of it is recycled in the 90 percentile. We are able to do things better, and we'll get things done better here on the ground for the people that we represent, including healthcare, including education, including the exploitation of our natural resources. We saw just recently in Fort Chippewa in Alberta, up north here, down at the bottom of the top of the Athabasca River, we saw the federal government being called out for Transport Canada not cleaning up its environment after they, left nothing short of what I consider to be a toxic spill. They should clean it up, but they won't. Why don't they clean it up? Because they're not close enough to people to actually recognize that this is a priority of the people, just like they're not close enough to our industries to recognize how important it is that people have jobs and people have quality of life and people are able to earn a living and a good living. So
okay, I want to come back,
though. The federal government just needs to stick out of our business.
Okay, I do want to come back to the timeline of this, the 4-week timeline, because we have heard from the federal environment minister's office saying that the timing of this is cynical. This is an arbitrary deadline that comes at the same time as the Premier faces a leadership review and wants to look tough for the hardcore base within his party. Stephen Guilbeault's office is also calling this reckless political games. How do you respond to that?
I don't really care. I don't think it's a reckless political game. This is about our industries. It's about people's jobs. It's about Alberta families. It's about the record number of people that want to come to Alberta and have come to Alberta over the last number of years, because they know that this is a place where we will stick up for them and we will make sure that they have the ability to make a good living. It's no secret that Danielle Smith, our Premier, is a very strong Premier, and that she will stick up for the people of Alberta whenever she needs to. And this is another example of her doing that, and I'm very proud of her doing that.
So this isn't just meant to coincide with the fact that you've got your convention coming up at the beginning of November and the Premier is going to be facing a leadership review in Red Deer.
Well, as a past leader of a political party, I can assure you that things are always going on in the political sector as they do go on in the government or opposition sector. So there's always issues of leadership and leadership review that are constantly ongoing. This is just one more step in a process that political leaders have to do as a result of the choice to become one. But she's going to go through with a very healthy margin, I'm sure, and I'm very excited about being there to support her in that. She's been a great leader, and she's a great premier, and I'm looking forward to some amazing things happening for the people of Alberta as a result of her leadership.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Alberta Energy and Minerals Minister Brian Jean, thanks for your time on this.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Canada's Public Sector Integrity Commissioner is sounding the alarm. Harriet Solloway says her office is overwhelmed with complaints about alleged wrongdoing inside the federal government. She's now looking to the government for more funding to tackle the backlog. And the commissioner is with me now, Harriet Solloway. Thank you so much for coming in.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start by putting some context into these complaints. Just how many complaints of alleged wrongdoing are we talking about that your office is dealing with right now?
Currently, we have about 161 that are active either at the analysis stage or in investigations. We have a little over 50 in investigations.
Okay, and you're saying that this is creating a lot of additional pressure on your office. Why is that?
Well, just to give you an idea, the caseload has increased 4 times since just over the past 2 years, and our resources have not kept pace, and hence, to give you an idea, we have a total of 8 investigators. We have over 50 active cases, probably more coming down the pipeline, and that clearly is not enough to ensure a sufficient level of attention to be able to deal with cases in a rapid manner.
And what's the nature of these complaints that you're dealing with? I'm pretty sure that they deal with a wide breadth of issues inside the government.
They certainly do, but it's important to note that our office really only has jurisdiction over the most serious of issues, so gross mismanagement or serious breaches of code of conduct. We don't deal with things of a smaller nature that usually have other resolution mechanisms.
Okay, so why do you think there's been this increase in the number of complaints coming to your office? What do you attribute it to?
Well, I really do think that the office has worked hard over the last number of years to create awareness of its existence. I think that every time that there is a case report that's tabled in Parliament, that garners a lot of attention. So the office was established in 2007, and I think that we're at the point where more and more public servants are aware that it exists. I really do think it's an awareness issue and a trust issue. They see that we do deal with these complaints in a fair manner.
Okay, so you're focused on, as you said, the most serious cases of alleged wrongdoing inside the government. So tell me, what are the consequences if some of these complaints aren't going to be able to get resolved in a timely fashion?
Well, I think it goes without saying that if they can't be resolved in a timely fashion, it means that the problems, if they do exist, may fester over a longer period of time and have negative consequences either for individuals or for the Canadian public, because we have a range of types of wrongdoings that can range from fraud or mismanagement to harassment and those types of complaints. And so obviously there's an immediate impact on those who are involved in the workplace, but also there's a consequence for the Canadian public.
Okay, now, I guess to try and rectify this, you say you're looking for a boost to your office's budget, $1.3 million immediately, plus what would essentially be a doubling of the budget through 2029. Now, we have a spokesperson for the Treasury Board, President Anita Anand, who says they're looking into it. So how hopeful are you that you're going to be able to get this extra money to be able to work on that backlog?
I'm very, very hopeful that we will be able to get the funding needed. I don't think in the overall context of government expenditures, that it's a lot of money. And I think that integrity in the public service and the perception of integrity is critical to a functioning democracy. So given the import of the issue and the relatively low cost to ensure that it can be done well, I'm really quite optimistic. I would also add that I do believe that there is broad support for our mandate, so I am very hopeful.
Right, let's talk about that mandate, because we know we've seen a lot of stories about issues with contracting, with procurement. How do you think the public and the media coverage of these issues affects the number of complaints that come your way, and affects how you do your job?
Well, I think that when serious issues are raised in the public domain, of course, it raises the question among the population, okay, well, what is being done about it? What can be done about it? And I think that it's quite reassuring for the public to know that there is an office such as ours that is looking into it, looking to uncover wrongdoing, looking to shed light, looking to further accountability. And so I do think that I think that the import of our office is in what it brings to, it brings the credibility to this public service so that people can know that if there is wrongdoing, it's being addressed.
All right, Harriet Solloway is Canada's Public Sector Integrity Commissioner. We'll certainly be watching this story as it unfolds. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
And that is Primetime Politics for Monday, October 7th. I'm Andrew Thompson in Ottawa. For all of us at CPAC, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.